Hello and a very warm welcome to Biggest Exclusive tonight with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Now today, Russia is annexing the Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions of Ukraine. This after holding what it called referendums in occupied areas of Ukraine. Now Kyiv and the Western governments have called these referendums a sham. They say the votes have breached international law. The West has called Russia's move coercive and non-representative. But Russia has gone ahead with the annexation today in a ceremony in the St. George's Hall of the Grand Kremlin Palace that you can see on your screens today. Now, it should also be noted that today's ceremony takes place 8 years after Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine. So the question that we are going to ask is, will the annexation now only prolong this war that is already 7 months down? All right, so let's also try and bring you the areas that we are looking at in terms of annexation today. This has been a big move. As we said, the first historic move was when Crimea was annexed by Russia. And today, this is a look of Russia's annexation. Remember, now Russia, after this annexation, will be occupying almost 18% of Ukraine. And that's massive in terms of the war. Crimea annexed in 2014 already. Then let's also look at the other regions that will be annexed. We are looking at Lugansk and Donetsk, which have already been the separatist areas. That is the Donbas region as far as Lugansk and Donetsk is concerned. Zaporizhzhia, again, a very crucial area. Remember, the nuclear reactor happens to be there. It's equally fragile, and the UN was pushing for this area to be a military-free zone. But what happens to this fragile area now is something that we'll have to look at. Kherson is another region that has been declared independent along with Zaporizhzhia. What is the big picture of the annexation today? Russian flag over nearly 100,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. As I told you, that is 18% of Ukraine now under Russia's control already. Putin's message is very clear. The attack on Russian territory will invite full retaliation. Of course, he's also gone ahead and threatened nuclear action as well. Thirdly, Putin's ratings had spiked post-2014 Crimea annexation. Will this happen again? Because as we all know, previous polls were indicating that Putin's popularity was dipping down. But the current annexation, will this bring his popularity back? Let's not forget there have been protests going on already in Russia. Now, fourthly, annexation has made the negotiation impossible. That's what Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has to say. Fifth, test of Russia's red line soon as Ukraine keeps up the offensive. What we'll have to watch out is whether Ukraine will manage to step up its offensive and to what extent will NATO go to defend Ukraine. Let's try and get a sense of ground zero. And for that, I'm joined in by Sanjay Suri. Remember, CNN News 18 is one of the few channels who have sent someone to cover this war. And Sanjay Suri happens to join me live from Kharkiv. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for joining the broadcast today. Now, since you are there, what has been the sentiment and the situation on ground level? We've seen that grand ceremony happen in the Kremlin Palace. It's been a big move. Now that Zaporizhzhia and Kherson have been granted independence, what will this now translate in terms of annexation?
Well, this annexation is in name only. This is a claim that has been made by Putin. Certainly, it is not going to be accepted in Ukraine. President Zelensky has said very firmly, we will not give an inch of territory. Right. He is backed by the US, by Western Europe, and quite apart from that support for Ukraine against Putin, Putin's own plans seem a little unconvincing. He had said Zaporizhzhia is now Russian territory. Well, that's not quite the case. The center of Zaporizhzhia is controlled by Ukraine. The mayor is Ukrainian. In the Donetsk Republic, we've had one town, Lyman, that has been taken by Ukrainian forces. Russian forces are on the pushback in that town. So these 4 areas claimed by Putin are not quite entirely controlled by him, not entirely controlled by Russia. So it is a little difficult to figure out at the moment, and we've had no explanation or elucidation from Russian authorities how this split within these regions will be played out, because Russia does not control these regions.
Right.
So is this going to mean that people who are Ukrainian and in these areas become prisoners in effect within these areas? Will the city center of Zaporizhzhia become a prisoner to the rest of Zaporizhzhia controlled by Russians? A lot of these aspects are not very clear, quite apart from the fact that Putin has absolutely no support from this around the world, not even from his closest allies.
And since you spoke about the status of Ukrainians, I'd like to ask you, do people also see the referendums as a sham, which is what the West has also been alleging? Russia, of course, continues to counter by saying that these are not sham referendums.
Well, these cannot really be a matter of opinion. We've had what are claimed to have been referendums, but we've had no transparency in the referendums, no transparency in communication on how these were conducted, who received the ballot papers, no independent oversight, who voted, who did not. The fact is that Russian speaking does not mean Russian supporting necessarily. Here in Kharkiv, a lot of people are Russian speaking. The majority are Russian speaking.
Right.
And yet this is the area where there has been such a strong pushback from Ukraine. So these assumptions that are sometimes made a bit hastily don't quite stand. And then we've had Putin saying all sorts of things about rights and wrongs, about the rights of Russia and the wrongs of the West, as he calls it. But this on a day when civilians were killed in Zaporizhzhia for just going to pick up their relatives. And the same day, there's a rock concert in a Red Square. This does not quite, this kind of triumph, this kind of rhetoric, this kind of concert does not quite sit easy with what he did to the civilians in Zaporizhzhia.
But Sanjay, the supporters of Russia always latch on to the argument provided when it comes to the annexation of Crimea. They said that, the world couldn't stop Russia from annexing Crimea from Ukraine. What will the annexation of these 4 territories now mean, and also the partial mobilization for the ongoing war in Ukraine?
Well, Crimea, Russia got away with. The difference between Crimea and this is that Russia will find it very difficult to get away with this. The kind of solidarity we've seen around the world against this attempt at annexation, we certainly cannot call it an annexation. This kind of unified response and determination against allowing Russia to get away with it is something we've seen now. We haven't seen it before. And whatever the history and whatever the rights and wrongs of the past, people are taking a stand, and they've taken a very firm stand. It's not just the UN Secretary General, it's countries around the world that have taken this stand.
Many thanks to you, Sanjay, for bringing in all those inputs. Stay safe. And with that, let's also open the dais over to our guests.